Welcome to the Compact Murder podcast from compactmurder.com, the show where we explore murders, murderers, serial killers, and assassinations. This is episode 50. Dennis Rader. For more than 30 years, a quiet family man named Dennis Rader lived an apparently everyday life in Wichita, Kansas. He was a husband, a father, a church leader, and a compliance officer for the local council. He mowed his lawn, attended Sunday service, and waved to neighbours who thought of him as reliable and polite. But behind that calm exterior was one of America's most calculating serial killers, a man who called himself BTK, short for Bind, Torture, Kill. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader murdered 10 people, each attack meticulously planned, and then vanished back into the ordinary routine of small-town life. When he was finally caught in 2005, the world discovered that the killer Wichita police had hunted for decades had been living among them all along. The story of Dennis Rader is one of arrogance, deception, and the horrifying ability of evil to hide in plain sight. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on the 9th of March, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the oldest of 4 sons. He grew up in the nearby town of Wichita, where his parents both worked long hours. As a child, he later claimed he felt neglected and began developing dark fantasies. From an early age, Rader was fascinated by control and power. He admitted that as a boy, he tortured small animals and fantasized about tying up women. These fantasies, which began as daydreams, grew increasingly violent as he reached adolescence. After graduating from high school, Rader attended Kansas Wesleyan University but dropped out after poor grades. He then joined the U.S. Air Force, serving from 1966 to 1970. His service was unremarkable, and upon his return home he married his longtime girlfriend, Paula Dietz. Together, they settled into suburban life. By the early 1970s, Rader was working at an outdoor supply company, attending church, and projecting the image of a conventional young husband. But underneath, his sadistic fantasies had intensified, and he was ready to make them real. On the 15th of January 1974, Rader broke into the Otero family's home in Wichita. Inside were Joseph and Julie Otero, and 2 of their children, Joseph Jr., aged 9, and Josephine, aged 11. Rader tied up the family at gunpoint and strangled them one by one. It was his first known murder, and the brutality shocked Wichita. The killing seemed senseless. Nothing of real value was stolen, and there were no clear suspects. After the murders, Rader began following media coverage obsessively. He was proud of his work, and frustrated that the police and press did not seem to appreciate the horror he had created. Within months, he began writing anonymous letters to local newspapers, taunting investigators and taking credit for the crimes. It was in one of these letters that he first introduced himself by his self-chosen moniker. BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill. BTK's next known victim was Catherine Bright, a 21-year-old student murdered in April 1974. Rader attacked her and her brother in her home, stabbing and strangling Catherine after shooting her brother, who managed to survive. For years after, BTK seemed to disappear, but Rader was carefully selecting his victims and refining his methods. He spent time stalking potential targets, taking photos, and keeping detailed notes in what he called his hit kit. Wichita was paralyzed by fear. Women bought new locks and avoided being alone at night. Police formed task forces and followed thousands of leads, but the killer always seemed one step ahead. In March 1977, he murdered Shirley Vian, a young mother, and later that year, Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old secretary. After the Fox murder, Rader made another fatal mistake. He couldn't resist writing again. In a poem sent to a local television station, he described the killing and mocked investigators. The letter confirmed what police already feared. BTK was not finished. Rader's need for attention became one of his defining traits. He relished the media coverage, feeding on his ability to manipulate the public. He wanted to be famous, to be remembered as a criminal mastermind. In one letter he wrote, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national recognition?" For Rader, the killings were a way to feed his ego as much as his fantasies. He was meticulous, patient and organised, but he was also deeply narcissistic. His desire to prove his superiority would eventually lead to his capture. After 1979, BTK vanished once more. Unknown to police, Rader had taken a job as a compliance officer for the city of Park City, where he enforced local codes and ordinances. Residents described him as petty, overzealous and fond of authority, the kind of man who would measure your grass and write you a ticket if it was too long. He also became an active member of his church, serving as president of the Congregation Council. His wife Paula remained unaware of his secret life, and together they raised 2 children. For more than a decade, Rader appeared to have stopped killing. Police wondered if BTK was dead, imprisoned, or had moved away. But he was simply dormant, quietly reliving his crimes through photos, drawings, and detailed journals he kept hidden in his home. In 2004, Wichita was on the verge of experiencing a nightmare revival. The local newspaper published an article marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders, suggesting that BTK might never be caught. Rader, unable to resist the attention, decided to re-emerge. He began sending letters again, this time directly to the media and police. He mailed packages containing photographs, photocopies of crime scene items, and even a doll tied up to resemble one of his victims. Each communication was arrogant and theatrical. But in one letter, Rader asked police an unusual question. If he sent them a computer floppy disk, could they trace it? The police, hoping for a break, replied publicly through the newspaper saying no, it would be safe. It was not. In February 2005, Wichita police received a purple floppy disk postmarked from BTK. Investigators analysed the metadata and discovered that the disk had been used at Christ Lutheran Church, where Dennis Rader was president of the congregation. When detectives checked the church's website, they found Rader's name listed. Surveillance confirmed his vehicle matched one seen near a previous victim's home. On the 25th of February 2005, after more than 30 years, police pulled over Rader near his home and arrested him. When asked if he knew why, he replied calmly, "Oh, I have suspicions." At the station, Rader confessed almost immediately. Over 30 hours of interviews, he detailed each of the 10 murders with chilling precision. He showed no remorse, only pride in the methodical way he planned and executed his crimes. Rader pleaded guilty in June 2005, recounting each murder in open court in a flat, emotionless tone. The public listened in horror as he described binding, torturing and killing his victims as though he were discussing routine tasks. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, the maximum allowed under Kansas law at the time, since the state had abolished the death penalty when his crimes occurred. He is serving his sentence at El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he spends 23 hours a day in isolation. His wife Paula filed for divorce shortly after his arrest, and his children severed contact. Dennis Rader's crimes left deep scars in Wichita and on the families of his victims. His ability to blend in, to appear ordinary while hiding monstrous secrets, has made him a case study in criminal psychology. Experts have described him as a classic example of a psychopath, intelligent, organised, and utterly lacking in empathy. He compartmentalised his life so completely that even those closest to him never suspected the truth. The BTK case also changed law enforcement practices. It highlighted the role of forensic technology in solving cold cases, with digital evidence on a simple floppy disk leading to the killer's downfall. It also demonstrated how a killer's ego can be their undoing. In interviews from prison, Rader has portrayed himself as two people: Dennis, the church-going father and husband, and BTK, the killer who fulfilled his fantasies. He has claimed that a monster inside him drove him to kill. But psychologists and investigators have rejected that idea. The man and the monster were one and the same, a man who chose to kill because it made him feel powerful. At the time of recording, Dennis Rader is 80 years old and remains imprisoned in Kansas. He occasionally writes to criminologists and law enforcement officers, eager to discuss his legacy. Even in confinement, his narcissism persists. The story of Dennis Rader is one of chilling duality, the outward respectability of a suburban father masking the inner darkness of a sadistic killer. His murders terrorized Wichita for decades, his taunting letters tainted with arrogance and cruelty. In the end, it was not the brilliance of BTK that ensured his place in history, but his fatal mistake, trusting his ego over his instincts. The same need for recognition that drove him to taunt police for years finally led them straight to his door. For Wichita, the capture of Dennis Rader marked the end of one of America's longest and most haunting criminal chapters. But it also left behind an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, the monster looks exactly like the man next door. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Compact Murder Podcast from compacthistories.com. If you did, why not leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/murdercoffee to see how. Also, please check out our other Compact podcasts. You will find them all at compacthistories.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.